Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our next episode of the Paralympian Podcast. We have former Paralympic footballer David Clarke here with us this morning. Good morning, David. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, guys. Pleasure to be here.
So for those that are listening in live here on Zoom, there are two ways in which you can ask David questions. So first of all, if you just make sure your microphones are muted, and if you do have a question, you can notify myself either by using the chat service or popping up your thumbs up, and then I will invite you to ask David your question. For those that are listening on Facebook, if you just drop your comments, your questions in the comments section, I will then get round to asking those, David, on your behalf.
Great.
So, David, just before we sort of get into some of the questions about your sporting and professional career, could you just give us a brief sort of introduction about your involvement in sport, what you're sort of most known for, please?
Yeah, of course. So I played 17 years of international blind football. What a lot of people don't necessarily know is before that I played 10 years of goalball, culminating in the Atlanta Paralympics. Switched to football sort of 1995, half did goalball, half did football. Then switched to football fully in 1996. Went on to play 144 times for England and Great Britain. And that culminated in my what I like to think is my retirement party, which was the 2012 Paralympics. And I retired after that. I didn't ever... I always had a job, so I was never kind of a professional athlete in the current sense, which is amazing to see those opportunities now. And in that kind of guise, I'm a director of the British Paralympic Association, and I'm also a member of the FA Council.
Incredible career you've had there, David, not just through your participation in sport, but obviously what you're doing now. So my next question for you is sort of going back to your very early childhood days, and can you remember what your earliest sporting memory was? Sort of how you became involved in the sports that you may have done?
Yeah. So I was brought up in Wigan in the northwest of England, but my parents were from Liverpool, so they were crazy about football. My dad was a big Liverpool fan. My mum was an Everton fan, and she married my dad, and he obviously managed to convince her to change her mind. But we're a classic split family. Grandparents and uncle's side of the family are Everton. My side was Liverpool. So you kind of grow up with that passion about sport anyway. And I imagine that there's kind of two things that I would remember from, firstly, Liverpool winning the European Cup in 1977. We were on holiday in a caravan. I remember seeing us lose to Man United in the FA Cup final the week on the Saturday, and then go and win the European Cup final on the Wednesday night. And that was when I was really bought into it and started to get excited about sport. But I remember going to my first ever Liverpool match, which was Liverpool versus Ipswich, and my dad was on the Kop and I was in one of the stands with school. And I just remember the atmosphere just being incredible. Liverpool won 2-0. And I mean, you don't understand this when you're 7 years old, but I met and chatted to Bill Shankly after the game, and I still remember his voice now, and it was just incredible. And, as a 7-year-old, that is like, you can't help but be hooked when you've met someone like Bill Shankly.
It's incredible. And that was sort of going to take me on to one of my next questions around, many youngsters around the UK have sporting heroes or icons. And you mentioned Bill there. He's obviously had a big influence on your sort of involvement in wanting to get involved with playing football. But were there any other sort of sporting heroes or people throughout your childhood that inspired you to take up sport?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a number of people. I mean, I've never really been one for heroes, but I am very much in favour of role models. And the problem is, of course, when I was growing up, when I was born and when I was in my younger years, it wasn't possible to play football for your school, for your local club, for your county, never mind your country. So the aspirations there, it was a bit difficult to want to play football at the highest level because it didn't exist. And I suppose very early on I realised that, but wanted to kind of learn and play and get a pathway to doing that, which has ultimately led to where we got to in 2013 with the game becoming professional, with a paid the possibility to be paid as a footballer, as a blind footballer. But along the way, actually, there were probably three people. I mean, firstly, my dad. He always used to give me what I would consider to be a pretty competitive time on the driveway with the ball. Never let me get away with anything. So that was, he was always a huge part of my life, and encouraging me to learn how to use the ball, pass the ball, kick the ball properly. Never gave me an inch really, which I think, in a nice way, which was really good. But I had two incredible teachers, Ron Dela Cruz at my junior school, who created a ball with sound in it so that we could play. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a ball that had some sort of ball bearings in it that we could hear rattle. And then, of course, when I went to secondary school in Worcester, Clive Spencer, who was head of sport there, again played an incredible role in encouraging me in all sports, and particularly football. And I spent every minute of the day, probably should have been studying, to be fair, but 8:30 till 9 before class, lunchtimes, after school, just playing football. And I played football with partially sighted kids. I played football with kids, between 12 and 18 years old. And I remember arriving at Worcester as a 12-year-old who couldn't see, and sort of being, forgive the kind of the view I'm expressing here, but pretty much at the bottom of the pile in terms of ability. That taught me how to use the football, how to keep the football, and encourage other people to pass me the football, because I knew I was going to do something with it. And that's just, I guess, how I honed my skills. So, my dad certainly in the early age to give me the aspiration, and then those teachers who facilitated it. And of course, I couldn't go without mentioning Tony Larkin, who was a sports teacher at RNC Hereford, who I only met when I was 25 years old. So you may think, well, why did he have an influence on you? But when I first went to the first ever training session and was coached properly in football for the first ever time, this was someone who really picked me up and improved me as a player and as a person. And so, whilst it wasn't in my early years, there's no doubt that Tony had an incredible influence on me. And just a small anecdote, and forgive the plug, but it's quite amusing to me that talking about these balls that didn't exist, and yesterday at RNIB we launched an IBSA ball that actually has my signature on it, which is it just makes me smile, to be honest, because it's a really lovely thing, and I hope that forgive me for the slightly egotistical thing here of having my signature on a ball, but I genuinely hope that will speak to youngsters and others coming up for the ball, and it wouldn't be unusual coming up for the game, and it wouldn't be unusual to have a Steven Gerrard or a Frank Lampard signed ball and that kind of stuff. And it's just, it was amazing that they came up with the idea of doing it. And as the advert goes, I was so impressed I bought one, so it's quite fun.
No, that's truly incredible. And what I liked there as well, David, about what you mentioned is, you're never sort of too old to learn, in essence. We're constantly learning in life, and even though you got to a point where you were considered very good, you were still learning during.
I think that's true. That's true professionally. That's true in sport. That's true in life in general. And I think, I remember having a conversation with Rennie Molenstein from Manchester United, and he was saying that the very best players, the Wayne Rooneys of this world, they want more coaching. They will always want coaching, and that's how they become truly superb players, because they realise that no matter how much ability they have and how good they are, they need coaching. If you think about the workplace, for example, quite often we focus on developing those who haven't quite made what we consider to be the grade or aren't quite meeting standards, and actually we often do that at the expense of people who are performing really well, and that's really unfair, because, as I say, they need coaching as much as anyone else. And I think I was always open to coaching because I knew I didn't always have the answers, and I knew I wanted to be better. And I think that's a mindset that's really, really important.
Yes, it definitely is, David. So sort of going on to my next question before I hand over to some of our listeners to see if they want to ask you anything. One of the questions I wanted to ask was sort of how sport aided in your development and helped you gain confidence, which you were able to take into other areas of your life.
Yeah, that is a super question, and one that really worries me at the moment, particularly with the COVID-19 situation and the need for social distancing and the difficulties we've had around guide running and around gyms and all sorts of things, which, of course, British Blind Sports, RNIB, Metro Sports, and lots of other people have been working on to solve. But I think for me, the whole concept of spatial awareness and my ability to have a good level of mobility and to be able to get myself from A to B and be confident in doing so came from sport. If you're, whatever level you're playing at, if you're having to hone your senses to listen to people, listen to balls, listen to instructions, know where you are in relation to, a 40 by 20 pitch, and this will apply to whatever sport we're talking about, with sight loss, whether it's, playing cricket, whether it's goalball, whether it's golf, whatever it is, the actual honing of your spatial awareness and that just constantly doing it just has such an amazing impact on your kind of spatial awareness and your awareness and your mobility, but then your confidence to go and use that skill out and about. So, what happened for me on the football pitch translated into crossing a busy road, or finding the bus stop, or going into a shop, and I think or being comfortable in the workplace, for example. And there's all sorts of other aspects from sport. I mean, you classic kind of FA, social, physical, psychological, technical. If you think about how that applies to life, it actually does apply to life, and you can transfer over from sport, in terms of how you live that life. And I think social is particularly important. To be a member of a club, to be a member of a team, is just the most incredible thing. And I've coached football now for 12 years, and I've just gone back. My under-18s team obviously finished to go off to university at the end of this year, and I've just gone back to coaching under-15s. And I love the relationship I have coaching those kids, because 12 years ago when I started, I get asked lots of questions about my eyes and how I could see things and and we're all aware of what went on in the Paralympics, and we're all working on the amazing work that Channel 4 have done, and Sainsbury's and lots of other people, and British Blind Sport, actually, in really raising the profile of grassroots and elite sport. And what's really interesting about that is that not only have I become more confident and being able to coach and be able to get around as a result of playing sport, because I'm falling back on a knowledge base that is built on actually playing the game. But actually, these 15-year-olds see that as sport, and I don't get any questions about how do you know this, how do you know that, how do you know where I am, how many things have I got up, because they consider me to be a sports coach based on sort of learned experience. And something very funny happened last night, actually, which was I was trying to do a drill, which was about playing a ball from the halfway line out wide to a certain point just before the byline, where they would cross the ball and someone would finish it. And they kept playing the ball either too softly or too shallow, so the ball wasn't getting wide enough. So I just grabbed the ball and I said, "Look, go and stand over." One of the kids, "Go and stand over there by the corner flag." So he did, and he gave me a shout, and I just pinged the ball to his feet, and it was kind of a collective "woo" like that kind of thing. But it was kind of like, okay, so that's how you do it, sort of thing. And for me, I was quite pleased at 50 years old I was able to still ping a ball 30 yards to someone's feet, but the normality of it, I mean, forgive the word, but it's just ordinary to those kids, and I love that. And I think all of that has come from the work that's gone on around sport and disability in sport, but B, I couldn't possibly have done that unless that confidence had been built up through all those wonderful people who have supported me, and having had the experiences that I've had.
That's incredible, David. And you're obviously inspiring these young players, obviously, to enjoy and love the game, but also they're learning many lessons which they'll be able to apply in later life, with maybe not necessarily knowing that just yet.
No, and that will transfer into, those kids are going to grow up to one day they'll be recruiting people, for example, and they'll think, oh, well, I had experience of a blind coach, and, hopefully these lessons go into wider areas of life.
I'm sure they will, David. I have Alex here who's would like to ask you a question. So I'd like to hand over to Alex for her question, please.
Hi, Dave. So I want to know what your experience was like meeting David Beckham. Do you think he is up to the skills of blind football?
Well, the evidence is out there, isn't it? Of course, on the films we did with him. I have met David Beckham a number of times. I met him at his house in Madrid in 2004 when I was doing some work with Royal Bank of Scotland. I met him as part of the Sainsbury's stuff, where we went off to a school to present the winner of their competition pre-2012. We of course did the Sainsbury's adverts, which was really cool, which I got to play football with him, and he wore the blindfold and he took the penalties and took him 3 to score, but my God, he did score. He was determined to do so. And he also very kindly, as he was in the middle of moving to Paris Saint-Germain from LA Galaxy, did a wonderful video tribute to my career, which was just amazing. And the fact he took time out to do that when he was so busy trying to sort his own career out was just amazing. So when I've been working with him, he has just been such a really down-to-earth, normal guy, and hugely supportive of five-a-side blind football. He's gone out of his way to show support. He sent messages to the team. And just sitting down having a chat with him as I did, and you'll see all the stuff on YouTube. It's just really funny talking just as a footballer to a footballer. And I think what's really important for everyone to know is you've never met a nicer bloke as well, which is great. But it was quite funny because I think some of the people who work around him were thinking that perhaps he wouldn't put the blindfold on and he wouldn't want to be running around at risk of banging into people and stuff, but he couldn't get enough of it. So I think it was great to see him getting stuck in there and really, taking it seriously.
Amazing, thank you.
He sounds like a great guy, and he's definitely a great ambassador for sport. Sort of takes me to maybe a second part to that question, David. How do you think that experience, obviously working with someone who is as well known and in the sort of public eye, sort of impact or change people's perception of visually impaired sport? Because there was initially, I suppose, that very clouded judgment of how people living with sight loss could participate in sport.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the very early days of playing internationally, where we got a lot of interest from the press, and they wanted to talk about the disability all the time, to the extent that someone came along from the Daily Express and wanted photographs with guide dogs on the pitch and things like that, and we just had to send the guy away because it was nothing to do with sport. Yes, we can understand maybe a little bit of novelty stuff around people who are totally blind playing football. Yes, but we had to work really hard to actually stop people from having those kind of perceptions of it. I think, as I say, I think London 2012 played an amazing role in showcasing disabled sport as sport, and particularly in the case of goalball and five-a-side football, showcasing VI sport as professional, elite, call it what you like, but fundamentally as sport. And there's no doubt that the likes of Beckham, the likes of Rooney, the likes of Steven Gerrard, the likes of John Terry, all coming out and saying how impressed they were to play alongside us and in certain situations and train with us. And, I think that was really important. And what was also important, which was a change that's taken place in the last few years, is for the England blind football team to be within the overall technical department within the FA, and all the England squads being going through the same routes, training at St George's Park. And I think that's the other thing. The impact it's also had is if you go to St George's Park, which I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's the most phenomenal place. And I was there at the opening in 2008, I think it was. The whole place is full of pictures of blind footballers, parachair footballers, women's footballers, England male footballers, and that for me is just sending the message straight away. And one quite amusing story, I was speaking at the National Game Conference in 2013. My wife and my 2 kids and I were invited to stay overnight at St George's Park while I spoke at this event. And so that was all good. So we got up there, we got the key to the room, we went up to the room, we walked into the room, and my wife said, "Oh my goodness, I do not believe it." And I thought like there was something wrong with the room. And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" And she said, there's a massive photograph of you over the top of the bed. It's just kind of weird. So it truly is inclusive. And the final thing on St George's Park is if you go there, there's a great big piece of artwork in the main lobby of the Hilton Hotel of all the people who've had 50 caps, 100 caps, 150 caps for England. And of course, you know, likes of Darren Harris, likes of Karen Seal, likes of myself are on there from the blind perspective, alongside, you know, amazing people like Farrah Williams and Rachel Yankee, and of course all of the England male players who've had that accolade as well. So I think that kind of that stardust, if you like, that drops down from the likes of you know, some of the very high profile footballers is really, really important to kind of again to encourage all of society to accept VI sport as sport.
No, it definitely is, David. And it's, I mean, when you look at those names that you've mentioned, David Beckham, John Terry, Wayne Rooney, they've obviously not looked at the disability, but more of the abilities.
Exactly.
Guys, and that is really what the main focus should be.
Yeah, one of my all-time greatest moments was at Arsenal's training ground where England were training for a game, doing a drill with Steven Gerrard. That was like, for me as a Liverpool fan, that was just beyond amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. We've just had a question submitted, David, on the Zoom chat from Katie. So I'd like to welcome Katie to ask you her question, please.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Katie.
Hi, David. I'm from Fulham Football Club Foundation, and I'm the disability officer there. And we run a blind and visually impaired program for, initially it was for adults, and now we've just branched out to juniors as well. And I'm just kind of wondering if you had any tips of how to best get sort of young people more confident and actually coming and giving it a try. So young people with a visual impairment or who are blind to maybe come and try our football sessions.
Yeah, of course. I mean, great work, Katie. That's brilliant. Great to hear you're doing that. And I'm not surprised because Fulham have led the charge on various things, particularly women's football and disability football. So I'm not surprised to hear that's happening at all. But brilliant, you are doing it. I mean, 2 things I would say. Firstly, in terms of actual sessions, as much time with the ball at the feet as possible. I mean, it's pretty much the case in any kind of form of development, football development. But that is critical because that's where I learned. You know, in blind football, if you don't have the ball at your feet, then you're kind of nowhere with the game because, you know, you can't. You know, if you look at dribbling skills, for example, the ball's always on the toes rather than in front of a blind footballer. So in terms of reach. This is where the great work that you do is so important, because the kind of places, you know, you kind of build it and they will come principle doesn't work. You've got all sorts of aspects to think about around like transport, particularly younger people, you know, supporting getting to events and things like that. But I would perhaps there's a number of places to reach out. I would say I would definitely speak to me in my other capacity as Director of Services at the RNIB, because there's ways in which we can reach into the community. There's ways in which British Blind Sport can reach into the community. There are local blind sports clubs, such as in London with Metro Sports, for example. And the other route, which is more challenging, but may be possible to do, is through the existing football pyramid. You know, we need more and more people looking out for talent and really publicising the opportunity, and I suppose also look at where blind and partially sighted people might go. So there's some fairly obvious ones in terms of local schools, and other such areas. There's some less obvious ones, such as opticians, optometrists, local eye clinics. And I'm not suggesting you're going to be allowed to go in and put massive adverts up, but you may well be able to drop leaflets or talk to the volunteers on the ground. This is probably the holy grail in terms of solving it. So I'm not going to give you a panacea for an answer, because getting a volume of players has been the biggest issue. But you'd hope that, you've got an amazing catchment area there in terms of depth of population. And the other thing I didn't mention, of course, which is a very important part of our sort of fabric in the UK, as we've got our sight loss, is the local sight loss charities and the Visionary Network, which again, hopefully close to people on the ground. So, but I think the premise you started with actually is the really most important one, which is thinking differently about how to do it, because doing it the normal way that one does football development isn't going to get you the numbers that you need. You're going to have to think a bit more wider. But I mean, look, open offer to you if you want to talk it through further, or find out ways in which we can introduce you to London South East Network within RNIB or the wider Visionary Group in terms of getting people, then just let me know.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I mean, our adult blind and VI session, when we started that, we initially had sort of 2 or 3 guys coming along. We actually had a young boy of 8 turn up as well, even though it was an adult session. I said come along initially because we didn't have an option for a junior session. And I suppose, unfortunately for us, he moved to Durham. I did then put him in touch with obviously Durham FA, just to try and obviously put him in touch with anything up there. And then we started the junior program, and we had 2 young people come along. One who was still playing in a mainstream environment currently, had enough vision to be able to cope in a mainstream environment. The other one had lost his sight as part of a medical problem, and had been playing football as a mainstream child, and then obviously lost his sight, hadn't played football since, and came along and gave it a go. And to be fair, they were both really good footballers. I signposted them both straight away to the England Talent Day that was going to happen at Reading.
Brilliant.
But unfortunately it got postponed. But I mean, we're trying to kind of think of different ways. We're actually working with the FA around that Project B1. So we're potentially going to launch that and roll that out with a CPD to all our staff, with the view that we can potentially start taking that into schools to offer that as a game that a mainstream school can play to incorporate young people with visual impairment as well as their sighted peers.
No, it sounds like you're doing all the right things. So, but if you need anything, just, as I say, just reach out.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your question, Katie, and please continue all your hard work. It's very, very exciting what you're doing down in your area. David, on to sort of our next question. I know we've sort of touched briefly on a little bit of your playing time, but I wanted to sort of go into a little bit more depth. So obviously you're very well known for the amount of times you were capped for England, and obviously your goal scoring record. But can you remember sort of the emotions that you felt when you lined up to represent England for the first time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was in an old traditional concrete futsal pitch in the middle of Madrid, in one of the town squares there. You may have seen them. They have just the concrete, flat, smooth concrete pitches. And it was the first tournament, and France, Greece, Spain and England were in the tournament. And it was amazing. And actually that's where I scored my first goal, which, funny enough, for an England striker was a penalty, actually. At that time, we were making quite a habit of missing them. But I did score mine, and that was my first goal. And it was such an amazing, I mean, football in Spain is obviously as much of a passion as in this country. And I used to love playing on those old pitches because the ball made a lot of sound because it was concrete on, rattle. So it was, not like playing on the AstroTurf as we play on these days. But just in the middle of, everything buzzing around you, and, birds tweeting, cars going around, people just living their life, and an international game of football going on in the middle. So that was brilliant. I love that tournament. Got my first yellow card in that tournament as well, actually, but that's another story. It's a bit of a striker's foul, I think it's fair to say. But that was an incredible first moment, really.
Definitely sounds it, and just to hear how far I suppose the game has come and developed, because now they're played in such a different, I suppose, arenas. Is great.
Well, that came about. There were a few occasions on the way. I remember playing in Sao Paulo in 1998 in the World Championships, and that was the first time we'd ever played really in front of a massive audience. I guess it was packed out. And funny enough, I remember playing against Argentina, and we came fifth in that World Championships. But we were playing against Argentina. I remember scoring one of the best goals I've ever scored, and unfortunately, because it was 1998, there's literally nobody's got video of it. So I kind of had my back to the defender, flicked the ball over his head, and met it on the other side and volleyed it past the goalkeeper. And I started to not believe myself about this goal until I was talking to Andrew Parsons, who of course is the president of the IPC, and what I didn't realise was that was his first ever tournament involved with disabled sport, and he was the tournament director. And finally, I'd found someone that had seen my goal. So yeah, I got no footage of it. I just got the memories, which obviously makes it better every time I tell it. But I actually did find someone who could verify that I did actually score that goal.
What a great story that is, David. We've just had another question come from Katie, so I'd just like to invite her again to ask her question.
I was just thinking, so if you've had your career, and obviously your amazing career with everything that you've been able to do, if you could give your young self one piece of advice, so now you've had your experiences, what would you tell yourself as a child to either do more of or do differently?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think I straddled the amateur to professional era, and I was sort of by 2010, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, I was effectively a full-time athlete, training 6 days a week, working 5 days a week, which clearly can only happen for a certain amount of time before you go mad. But I absolutely loved that time. And so for me, it would have been to get some really good support around in terms of sports science, access to gyms. So in my final kind of 3 years involved with football, I had a football coach 2 days a week. I had a fitness training, strength and conditioning type training 2 times a week. And then the other 2 days a week, I used to go for a mixture of programs provided by the FA. So mostly on my treadmill. So, a mixture of long runs and interval type stuff. But I'd have loved to have got that advice and support earlier. And in fact, one of the fundamental things that happened was that we were given some watches that monitored the fitness, and they could be downloaded at camps and all that kind of stuff. And so, again, that was, having that technology on hand made it really, really easy to train and to follow what you were doing. And I didn't, we didn't have that in the early days. We were getting together probably once every 2 months, and everything else in between times was what you did yourself. And I didn't necessarily have the right relationships with the local gym or the right or no local coaches. So I think for me, the advice I would have been giving myself is to actually go and make that happen much earlier. And of course, I also had a 7-year gap from leaving school. I was playing goalball, yes, but I had a 7-year gap from leaving school to then coming back into playing football when football had got its act together around the world and come up with a format that was globally accepted. That's not going to happen now, of course. But for me, those 7 years were 7 years lost, really.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Cool.
Thank you again for your question, Katie. I suppose the next question that I wanted to sort of ask you, David, obviously there's many sort of dressing room tales, particularly obviously with some of the the Premier League former footballers, etc. And there's quite a few funny stories out there as well when former players meet up and whatnot. But what is the funniest story that you sort of have from within the dressing room or on training camps or anything like that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, that's not always easy because there is a lot of we have. I mean, just picking one is the hard bit because you just have so much fun. We used to have under the guise of warm downs, we used to have a lot of fun in the swimming pool with playing. I think the game was called Blob with a ball, and it was more like a mixture of water polo and underwater rugby. I think is a bit, which was because of course you got the balance in a blind football team of the sighted goalkeepers and the blind players. You've got like a squad of 10, of which there'd be 2 sighted keepers and then 4 blind, 8 blind people. So we had a lot of fun. I remember we had a lot of fun on that, as I say, under the guise of a warm down. I mean, I remember people storming out of, it getting a bit heated at times. People storming out, but storming out into a broom cupboard rather than storming out of the actual building, which was quite fun. A typical mistake of a blind person that I might well have made myself. I mean, a lot of really, just the humour of a dressing room and the way different people are and the way they react to certain situations and knowing who likes to stay calm, knowing who likes to have a good laugh, knowing a lot of fun with ice. I think it's fair to say, just winding a few people up with ice packs and such like. But nothing that's going to break a rib for you, I don't think. I just always found the dressing room a really, really great place to be. You obviously had that, the nerves, and then you everyone expresses those in different ways. I remember one particular occasion, a complete version of Bohemian Rhapsody being belted out, and then we went on to play pretty rubbish in a 1-1 draw against Italy, so we never did that again. In fact, in that game, we were 54 seconds away from not qualifying for Beijing. And I remember backheeling the ball across the box to Darren Harris, who then slotted it in the back of the net. And we ended up drawing the game 1-1. And that meant we made the semis, which then we made the final and we qualified for Beijing. But yeah, we won't sing that song again because we didn't play great. As I said, we used all our energy in the changing room beforehand rather than actually on the pitch. And I also remember in that particular tournament, we had an amazing doctor who sadly no longer with us now, Brian Aarons, who used to be the doctor for the Crazy Gang, the Wimbledon team. And I remember in the final, I needed a couple of stitches in the top of my head because someone's tooth had hit the top of my head. So I played the whole game with a huge bandage wrapped around my head. And then straight after the final, we had the closing ceremony, and my head was still needing stitching. And I said to the doc, can we, we're going to stitch my head now? And he went, oh, and someone just brought out a couple of bottles of wine and, for the closing ceremony. He said, well, I'll have a couple of glasses of wine first and then I'll stitch your head. So I remember going back into the dressing room where he'd had a couple of glasses of wine and he said, do you want any pain numbing? I said, oh no, don't worry about it. So he then set about stitching my head. He did a very good job after a couple of glasses of red, I have to say. No, I mean, look, there's always good fun things that happen in dressing rooms, but that's probably the final one I would say, which I remember to this day. And I remember we got beat in the semi-final in I think it was in Turkey, and the Spanish were absolutely, they won 1-0. They were absolutely cock-a-hoop in the next door dressing room. And I remember Tony Larkin swinging the door open and forcing us to listen to their celebrations, and then slamming the door and saying, well, that's what you guys would have got if you'd have been playing. Blah, 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 blah. And it was really hurtful at the time. And, there were a lot of tears and stuff because we'd just been knocked out. But looking back on it, it does strike me as slightly amusing.
I know you just mentioned briefly there about the Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
And I suppose it probably became a bit of a superstition, but did you have any superstitions or pre-match routines that you always followed, David?
Oh yeah, for me always, absolutely. Yeah, none of them ever did me any good, by the way. But yeah, always left sock, right sock, left boot, right boot. Absolutely, absolutely always. It just, I don't know why. I used to have also, weirdly, I used to have this thing about room in the hotel. So, you know, if you came out the lift and turned left, I'd always want my room on the left-hand side. I've no idea why. It just felt right. And if it was, I never then had a room on the right. I always felt a bit weird. Absolutely no rational reason why that is important, but you know, it won't be the weirdest superstition you've ever heard a footballer talk about. But for me, it was left, right, left, right.
No, that's great. And you know, just to sort of wrap things up before we finish this morning, David. Obviously, you've scored and played on some of the biggest stages in sport. You've won countless accolades, obviously one of them being included in the National Football Hall of Fame. What do you feel is your biggest achievement during your footballing career?
Gosh, well, I'll tell you the scariest thing I've ever done. And the scariest thing I've ever done is taking part in sport really Strictly Come Dancing. And I might have played 144 games of football for England and Great Britain, but standing in the wings in Elstree with Karen Hauer, waiting to go on for the one take we had to do the dance with the other three Paralympians was the scariest I've ever felt in my life. So I'm actually glad I ended up doing football and not dancing, to be honest. I mean, look, to be recognised for the National Football Museum was amazing. To get the Lifetime Achievement Award, I don't know if you know, but I also I was born in Wigan, and through a complete set of weird circumstances and being invited by David Bernstein to be the guest of honour at the 2013 FA Cup final, I ended up, much against the odds, presenting the FA Cup to my hometown team of Wigan Athletic, which was serendipity gone mad, really. And that was an amazing experience. But I think there's two things from London 2012. I'll never forget taking the Townsend, who came into the opening ceremony from the orbit on the rope there, and handed me the torch, and I ran over to the recently sadly deceased Margaret Maughan, who was the first ever Paralympic gold medal winner for Great Britain, and she rolled her wheelchair up to the cauldron and set light to the cauldron, and the cauldron kind of came up, and I was just stood there with Joe and with Margaret and 80,000 people around us, millions around the world, and the heat from the cauldron and the feeling that football was finally truly part of the Paralympic movement. That was the feeling I had. And talking to colleagues from Spain and from France and from Brazil and Argentina over the next few days, they felt the same thing. To have a Paralympic footballer play that role, you know, was amazing. And then, of course, scoring my first goal was in that Paralympic stadium. I remember beating three players and then having the ball on my right foot and thinking, I don't really normally shoot with my right foot, but I just hit it as hard as I could and the ball went in. 4,500 people around the stadium going crazy. Everyone, you know, watching it in pubs, in betting shops, in schools, in parks, and, you know, all over the country, all over the world. Saw that goal, which was particularly disappointing for me in a way. And the first thing I actually did was run up and hug the referee, which made the front page of the Metro the next day. So, you know, we all have our embarrassing moments, even moments of success. But just that whole thing, and just sat on my balcony and listening to 250,000 people coming into the Paralympic Park every day to come and watch sport was just amazing. And if, David, if you allow me one more, going to 100 goals, a hat trick against Germany was in the European Championships in France in 2009. Also was an amazing feeling. So I went from 98 to 101 as a result of that hat trick against Germany, which we won the game 4-1. And yeah, something I'll never forget.
Some fantastic memories there, David. And you know, it's in an essence that you know, London 2012 Games experience is a very good way to sort of top your very successful career, really.
Yeah, it was amazing, and for that to be the point at which the game went professional, that had been something I've been striving for all my life, really. For blind, for there to be a traditional pathway for blind people to follow from 5-6 years old right through to being able to play the game at the highest level, and it was wonderful to see that, that achieved as a result of what happened in London.
Yeah, and you've definitely been a pivotal part of football becoming now a full-time sport within the disability.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some amazing people along the route. People like Jeff Davis at the FA, some of the players that have been around, a lot of this time. Someone like Darren Harris, who I was at school with, has been an incredible person who's, played so many games for England and Great Britain himself, and still playing a pivotal role. So there's been so many people over the years. Tony Larkin, I've already mentioned, but collectively, it's been brilliant to get it to a space, and it's been brilliant to have someone like the FA as a governing body that really takes it seriously as well. I'm sure when finances are under threat as they are now, it's great to see them continuing to support disabled football.
Definitely, and their work, what they're going to be doing over the coming months and years, is going to be pivotal in the game developing even further from where it already has done.
Spot
on. David, so I'd like to obviously thank you for your time this morning. You've been a fantastic guest, and I do apologise to those listening in who haven't had the opportunity to ask David a question. But if you did have any questions for him, please feel free to contact myself, and I will pass those on to David. To tune into our next Paralympian podcast, we have that taking place on Friday, the 9th of October, where we'll be having our guest Simon Butler, who is a former GB sprinter. Thank you, everybody. And it's been a pleasure again, David.
Thanks, guys. Look forward to your questions.